I always love coming to New Day. As Dean of the School of Christian Thought at HCU, I get to visit a lot of different churches. New Day is my favorite, though. So don't tell any of the other ones, though. A little bit about me beyond that. I've am assistant professor of theology at Houston Christian, so I get to teach students as well as lead our college. And one of my areas of study in particular is theology and the arts, and how theology and human creativity kind of work well together. I have a lovely family. My wife is right here. If you, she's wonderful. You should get a chance to meet her after. And I'm working on a book right now on horror movies, right? And so I've been working on it for a while. So around Halloween is really normally when my schedule blows up with people wanting me to come on podcasts and talk about these things. But I'm happy to be here with you all today on Memorial Day to talk about what scary movies and God have to do with one another. And it's a little bit of a tricky topic. And so John messaged me and says, hey, do you want to come and preach? And maybe you can talk a little bit about this horror stuff that you're working on. But it's tough because when you talk about horror movies, like everybody's got a line that, here are the things that are good and normal, and then here are the things that aren't. And so you talk, oh, do you like movie A? Oh, yeah, that was a good movie. Man, I really like that. Do you like movie B? Oh, yeah, that's really good. Did you like movie C? You need to see a therapist, and everybody's got a different line. So it's a little bit tricky. So maybe I'll start off by asking this question of you all: who here likes scary movies? Like who likes scary movies? Okay, it looks like about a third to a half of you, and that's all right. That's pretty normal. A lot of people don't. It is the most disliked film genre of all the major Hollywood genres, right? So more than any other genre, people don't like scary movies. But it's also understandable that we don't like scary movies because fear is a negative emotion, right? Normally, we spend a lot of our lives trying to avoid being scared. But in this case, when people watch a scary movie, they're putting themselves in the way of fear. And in order to answer the question of why people like scary movies, there's been research and philosophical speculation done on this, and some researchers at the University of Chicago came out with a really interesting study, big study that they did on why people watch movies that make them afraid, right? Why watch scary films? And they basically broke it down into three categories. So I want to ask you all about these three categories. So the first category of horror movie watchers are the thrill seekers, right? They like being afraid. So these are kind of like the folks who want to go on roller coasters. They enjoy that thrill. Is anybody out there like a thrill seeker when it comes to that? They really sort of dig that stuff. Okay, there's a few of you. The thrill seekers just get a kick out of going through like a really intense experience. Then there's another group. And that group is what you might call the white knucklers, right? So a white knuckler is a person who, when they have to watch a movie that has, their friends are all making them, they sit there the whole time, or you're watching through your fingers, and those people are a lot of fun to watch a scary movie with, right? And the reason why they would watch a movie is peer pressure, or because they want to prove something to themselves. I'm going to overcome this. And that's why you might be a white knuckler and still watch a horror movie. And I was like that for a long time. When I was a kid, I was so afraid of scary movies. It was the 80s. It was the peak of bad, trashy horror movies. And they're all around the video store, and I didn't like any of that. And I didn't even like The Incredible Hulk. That's how much I didn't like scary things. And so when I was a kid, when The Incredible Hulk would come on, I'd go shut off the TV. And then Mr. Rogers had The Incredible Hulk come on to explain to scared kids like me that The Incredible Hulk wasn't real, and I stopped watching Mr. Rogers. That's the sort of scaredy cat that I was, a true white knuckler, right? But then as I began to study the problem of evil and the nature of evil, I got a little bit more interested in maybe thinking through evil through horror. And so I became the third category, which you might call the studious prepper, right? The researchers discovered there's another category of horror watcher, which is a person who's trying to kind of understand more about the world, right? Or think through a situation. What would I do if I was in that situation? Has anybody here ever thought, what would you do if there was the zombie apocalypse? Anybody thought about that? Okay, yeah, a lot of you. There's not going to be a zombie apocalypse, right? Zombies aren't real. But it's interesting to think about, right? Oh, you want to go to high ground. Here's who would get to be in my compound with me. Like, here's who I want. Think about this kind of stuff. And so if you're watching a scary movie, it's also an opportunity to like think through and test a situation you might not have been in. How do those people react? How would I react? Why is this thing making me scared, right? I think that third category is really interesting for thinking about the value of watching a scary movie. Because stories about evil and monsters may not be happy, but I think they often capture something that's true. And so one of the things that comes up when I talk about horror is people say, but Tallon, don't you know? Philippians 4:8 says you should meditate on things that are pure and lovely and admirable and praiseworthy. That's what you should think about. And I have to remind them, Philippians 4:8 also says, but think on things that are true. Right? And I think that evil and the reality of sin and the damage that it does is something that is true and is valuable for us to think about. And so that's why I want to talk about monsters today. Is monsters are a way of us thinking about the evil, what's wrong with our world, disorder that happens in our world, and how God can fix it. So we'll start. This isn't just a video store conversation. This is a Bible conversation. So monsters are in the Bible, right? There are, of course, monstrous people, evil emperors and sinful folks and demons. But there are also what we might identify as truly monstrous things. So there's the red dragon at the end of Revelation. But then there's also another figure that I want to start with. This figure that's really interesting called Leviathan. And so if you've read through your Old Testament, this creature pops up every now and then. Leviathan. In the book of Job, we have Job talking about Leviathan and then God talking about this creature called Leviathan. We hear about it in the Psalms. Isaiah talks about Leviathan as well. And Leviathan was a monster that was in the popular culture of the ancient Near East, right? It's kind of like he was like a zombie or a vampire or a werewolf, and that the Leviathan is used periodically throughout that time in different ways to tell different sorts of stories. And he comes from the Canaanite religion. So in the Canaanite religion, there's a really powerful god, not the creator god, but just like a Zeus-like god, who fights against Yam, the god of the sea. The god who fights him is named Baal, you've heard in Scripture. And one of Yam's henchmen is a sea monster called Leviathan, right? Baal fights Leviathan and defeats him. And Leviathan is this multi-headed sea serpent that represents the chaos and disorder of the sea. So if you want to think about Leviathan in your head, I think not a bad comparison is Godzilla, right? Godzilla is this sort of destructive force who comes out of the sea, total chaos wherever he goes, and destruction. That's Leviathan. Now, in Canaanite religion, in the Baal cycle, Baal fights very hard and then eventually defeats Yam and Leviathan. But the way the Bible uses this figure of Leviathan is really different. And I think it's interesting how the Bible treats this monster. So let's turn to Psalm 74. As powerful as Leviathan might be, it's nothing compared with Yahweh. As powerful as Godzilla might be, it's nothing compared with God. This is the point that we have here in Psalm 74. It was you, O God, who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters, the multi-headed Leviathan. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up the ever-flowing rivers. The day is yours, and also the night. You established the sun and moon. So we have this chaos figure, this monster that embodies the chaos of the sea, that is triumphed over easily by Yahweh, who brings order and structure and boundary to the world. God fights the disorder of Leviathan and easily defeats it. But the Bible goes beyond just giving Yahweh the kind of more powerful than Baal role of Leviathan defeater. We read in Psalm 104 an even greater picture of how Yahweh handles Leviathan. So when we turn to Psalm 104, we read, "Many are your works, Lord. In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is sea, vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small. There the ships go to and fro, and Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there." Now, if you aren't in an ancient Near Eastern context, which is to say, if you're not already sort of thinking about Leviathan as this embodiment of the chaos of the sea. Sea can be pretty scary, especially if you're an ancient people and you have to go out in boats and the water kicks up. If you've ever been out on a boat in a storm, it's scary, right? So this frightening figure of Leviathan that appears in Canaanite mythology, the Bible pictures as not just defeated by Yahweh. The Bible here in Psalm 104 is saying Leviathan is a creation of Yahweh and under his command. We might translate it as saying God is so powerful, Godzilla is his pet, right? Something that is too wild and scary for you to handle, God keeps as a pet. He created so that it would frolic. That's how powerful Yahweh is that even monsters are under his command. There's another picture, though, of a monster that's more like the monsters that we think about, but it's connected to Leviathan. So when we get to the apocalypse of St. John, right, we call the book of Revelation, we have this incredible picture, this dreamlike picture of God's defeat of evil powers. And there, a character that we've known throughout the story of Scripture, the devil, appears in a different form than we normally see him. He appears in the form of a dragon, of a serpent. So I want to read to you. "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth." So here we have this powerful image of 12 invoking Israel, the church, Mary giving birth, God's work in redemption in the world. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough. They lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with them. The associations with Leviathan, with this monster figure, are clear in a number of places. The multi-headed serpents. In Revelation 12:5, this dragon spews out a river of water that tries to drown the woman and sweep her away, but she escapes. And so it's clear that what's happening here is that the revelation of St. John is putting monster makeup on the devil in order to show us who he truly is, right? Or you might say that the Bible here is using monstrous imagery to convey the inner reality of Satan's wickedness. The devil can appear as an angel of light, but in John's revelation, we see him more truly. We see what's true. The devil is a dragon that's here to destroy, and there's no way of hiding his inner evil. And that's what I think that good, scary movies can do as well, is that they can also reveal the true nature of evil. Because here's the problem with evil, is that evil were always horrifying and repellent. It wouldn't draw us. We would be warned. But that's not how evil often appears to us. Sin is often exciting, or it's sexy, and that's why it calls to us. So let's take 3 examples of certain types. So you might have, these are different vices, right? So you could have a successful seducer, a ladies' man. Or you could have a brawler, someone who's kind of out for vengeance. They're full of rage. They've got a cause, and they're going to destroy whoever gets in their way. Or you might have the continual consumer. And so I think as we look at these things, we go, oh, those are bad, but we see the allure, right? We get it. We're drawn by it. But what if we imagine sin or disordered love as a form of monstrosity? So now let's dress these things up in monster makeup, right? The seducer becomes, actually go back to the previous one, the seducer becomes a vampire, or the brawler becomes a werewolf, or the consumer becomes a zombie. Now they're a little less attractive. Or you might say, like Revelation, we've uncovered, we've pulled back the veil in order to reveal the truth about evil. One point that I think is helpful to make about the nature of evil is that evil is a form of disorder, right? Sin is, by definition, disordered. It's not just that it's messy or chaotic, but what that disorder is it's a disorder of our loves, right? Putting lesser things before greater things. Sin is when you let the things you love get in your way of your ability to love God and love others, right? So it's this things being out of place, not being in the right order. So cancer is the multiplication of cells more than they should be, right? It's good for cells to divide and grow, but not if they do so excessively. Most poisons are good for something, but they're just bad when they're put into your body. So disorder is what's destructive, and idolatry is when we put lesser things before greater things and worship them. So monsters are symbols of disorder, and likewise, sin is an example of disorder. So with the remaining time, I want to talk about three monsters that we have in popular culture and how they reveal the nature of some sin. So let's start with the vampire. All right, a figure like a vampire has been around for a long time, but the modern vampire started in the early 19th century. And it began with this guy named John Polidori, right? He was a doctor, and John Polidori was friends with a number of other writers and would hang out, and they all went on a summer trip. And while they were there, hanging out with his friend Lord Byron, Polidori was inspired to write this story. But here's the reason why Polidori was inspired. Lord Byron was a very successful poet. He was incredibly famous. And Lord Byron was a known seducer, right? He would get married, but then created great unhappiness for his wife and all those around him with his perpetual and continual affairs. He was the kind of person who sort of ate folks up. That when they came into his circle, they were charmed, but then ultimately their lives were wrecked. And so Polidori went off and wrote this story called The Vampire. It's about a suave, seductive, seemingly invincible fellow who destroys the lives of others and kills them. And he is reflecting on his friend, Lord Byron, who was suave, seductive, and destroyed the lives of so many. Since I've got an extra minute, I'll just add one more bit of trivia. So 1815, there was this volcano in Mount Tambora that erupted, and it put all this ash into the atmosphere, and it cooled the atmosphere. And so 1816 was called the year without a summer. And that was the summer that John Polidori and Lord Byron and some other friends went off to Switzerland. And it was so cold and so rainy that summer that they just stayed inside and told ghost stories. And that's part of what inspired John Polidori. But there was another friend who was also there at that time who was similarly inspired. And that person was Mary Shelley, and she wrote Frankenstein. So vampire is the less known story, but if it weren't for this volcano explosion, we might not have the vampire story and Frankenstein as well. But here we have, I think, the connection between the essential inner sort of sin, the nature of the seducer, someone who wants to take without giving. Right? They want to make love and take love, but they don't want to give love, right? They want to get what they can out of other people. And that sounds like Dracula, right? That is the essence of the vampire, is they use their power to suck the life out of other people. And we see it clearly in horror. Second example would be the werewolf, right? The brawler. So you might think about somebody who's a bar brawler. They're hanging around there just looking for an excuse to get angry and get into a fight. Maybe that doesn't apply to many of you. Sometimes we turn into people who hang around near our space bars. We were doing this online. When somebody says the wrong thing, then you're jumping in and mixing it up. But a werewolf is someone who lets their animal nature overwhelm them, overcome them, right? Their anger controls them instead of them controlling it. And this is the essence of the werewolf. It's someone who is cursed. Periodically, their animal nature comes out, and when it does, it's more destructive than they want. This is how immoderate anger works. The final example, and I want to make sure I save enough time for this, is I think one of the most interesting, because the most recent addition to the modern monster canon is the zombie, right? And the zombie is a reflection, in many ways, I think, of our modern condition. So the continual consumer, right, is a type that we recognize in ourselves and in our communities, perhaps more than the person who's overcome with anger or is overly charming and seductive. And it's a type of gluttony, it's a type of greed, and it's this continual mindless consumption. And this is what a zombie is. It's a mindless being that's endlessly consuming. And the first example of the modern zombie comes in the 1960s, the low-budget film by George Romero. And he made this movie called Night of the Living Dead. And it imagined the situation where, what if other people, other bodies, were our enemies? And so it creates this mythos where humans are our own worst enemy. The most dangerous place you could be is not the forest or a lonely countryside road at night. It's in the middle of a city. And then Romero evolves the idea. So in the 1970s, so in 1978, he makes his follow-up movie to Night of the Living Dead called Dawn of the Dead. And Dawn of the Dead tells the story of some survivors of the zombie apocalypse that take refuge in a shopping mall. And they lock themselves. Anybody ever thought about just like running around a shopping mall at night? It seems like a really fun idea, and that's exactly the kind of fun that they have. They go around, they get to try on all the clothes, they get to have everything they want. There's a little bit of the movie where they're having a really good time. They can eat all the food in the food courts. They get all the things that they've always wanted. But then there's bad news, though, which is all these undead that are out there in the world. They also feel the same way about the shopping mall. And so they slowly make their way toward the shopping mall. And as the survivors are looking out at these hordes coming, they ask, why are they coming here? And they respond, well, it's some kind of instinct. This was an important place in their lives. So Romero has hit the metaphor clearly. Zombies consume mindlessly, and this is what we do as well. I think if you really want the sharpened, even more sharpened version of this story, look at a film like Shaun of the Dead, which is about a guy who's sort of sleepwalking through his life. He's already a zombie, and he doesn't even realize that the zombie apocalypse has started. So the point here is that from the very beginning, from Leviathan to the red dragon, to the vampire, to the werewolf, to the zombie, monsters are really a way for us to see our own disorder, our inner disorder, clearly. Right? And it's not a happy truth. But as I close here, I want to read to you a wonderful quote that I love from a guy named Frederick Buechner. And Buechner he wrote this book called Telling the Truth, the Gospel as Comedy, Tragedy, and Fairy Tale. And Buechner says, the gospel is bad news before it is good news. It is the news that man is a sinner, to use the old word, that he is evil in the imagination of his heart. And that is the tragedy. But it is also the news that he is loved anyway, cherished, forgiven, bleeding to be sure, but also bled for. Once we recognize that bad news, then I think we can be ready for the good news. That just as God is more powerful than Godzilla, God is more powerful than our own monstrosity and can make a way for us to be free from it. And that's what scary movies help us to see. They help us to see our true problems. And that's a thing worth thinking about.